Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive on how to break through those beginner barriers in music production. You have to write 100 bad songs before you can write a good one. And it made me think of this parable from the book Art and Fear.
Oh yeah, I love that book.
It's about like this ceramics teacher who divides his class in half. One half is graded on quantity, so literally the weight of all the pots they make.
Wow.
And the other half is graded on like the quality of just one pot.
Okay.
And guess what? The best work came from the quantity group.
That's so interesting. It's like kind of counterintuitive, right?
Totally.
Like you would think that if you just focus on one thing, it would be better.
Yeah.
But it's almost like they got all the bad pots like out of their system by making so many.
Right. It's like they experimented more. They weren't so afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly.
So how does this apply to making music, right? So like, does this mean we should just be like churning out track after track?
Right.
And not like worrying about the quality?
I mean, it's not about just churning out garbage, right?
Yeah.
It's more about shifting your focus from trying to make one perfect track to like just building a habit of finishing songs.
Yeah, building that consistency.
Yeah. And when you focus on finishing tracks, you learn so much, even if they're not perfect at first.
Yeah, you actually learn by doing.
Yeah, exactly. You develop your workflow, you train your ear, and like you build up a portfolio of work.
Yeah, and you can't get better if you never finish anything.
Exactly.
It's like, just having all these like half-finished projects just sitting on your computer. Right. Yeah.
And the video also talks about this thing called loop limb.
Oh, yeah, loop limb.
Have you experienced this?
Oh, all the time. It's the worst.
It's like you get stuck in this loop and you don't know how to move forward with the track.
Yeah, and it's such a common problem for new producers.
Totally. So what do you do? What does the video say to do about this?
Well, the video suggests using reference tracks.
Oh, interesting. So instead of like staring at your screen, you just listen to some music that inspires you.
Yeah, exactly. But like, don't just listen passively.
Oh.
Actually break down the song. Like, analyze the structure, the arrangement.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it that way. Like really dissecting the song.
Yeah. It's like having a blueprint for success.
So what kind of things should we be looking for?
Well, like how long is the intro? When do new instruments come in? How does the energy build and release?
That's so smart. It's like reverse engineering a great song.
But then doesn't that run the risk of like sounding too generic?
That's a good question.
Like if you're just copying other people's techniques.
Yeah. It's a common concern, but the thing is like finding your own unique sound, it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
You can't like force it.
So you're saying don't worry too much about being original right away.
Exactly. Just focus on like mastering the fundamentals.
Okay.
And like the more you practice and experiment, the more your own like style will just naturally emerge.
Makes sense. It's like learning any skill.
Yeah.
You need that solid foundation before you can really express yourself.
Exactly.
Awesome. So we've talked about finishing tracks and, learning from our favorite music, but how do we actually make those tracks sound good?
Right.
So the video goes into mixing.
Right.
And it talks about this idea of subtractive mixing, like before you do additive mixing.
Oh, yeah, subtractive mixing.
What is that? Like, I've heard those terms before, but...
Yeah, so subtractive mixing is basically like, think of it like cleaning your room before you decorate.
Okay.
Like you want to get rid of the clutter first.
Okay.
And then you can, start adding the fun stuff.
Gotcha.
So in audio terms, that means like, removing any unwanted frequencies, taming the dynamics, basically just like...
So it's like decluttering your music.
Yeah, exactly. Just cleaning things up, making sure that, there's space for everything.
Yeah.
And then you move on to additive mixing, which is where you start adding effects, boosting frequencies, and like really getting creative.
That makes sense. So it's like you don't want to try to polish something that's like inherently flawed.
Exactly.
You want to fix the foundation first.
Right.
All these essential music production concepts, like EQ, compression, saturation, reverb delay, automation.
Right.
It's a lot.
Like, how do we even begin to wrap our heads around all that?
Well, I mean, think of it like your sonic toolbox, right?
Okay.
Like each of these is a tool that you can use to shape your sound.
So like EQ, I know it stands for equalization, but what does that even mean?
So EQ is basically It's like the art of shaping the frequency balance.
Oh, okay.
It's like, if you think of like a sculptor
Okay.
working with clay, right?
Mhm.
You're kind of shaping the sound.
But instead of like a physical object, it's sound waves.
Exactly.
Okay.
So like, you know, if you want a warmer bass line, you can use EQ to do that.
Okay.
If you want like the vocals to cut through the mix more,
Yeah.
you can use EQ to do that.
So it's not just about making things louder or softer.
No, it's much more nuanced than that.
Mhm.
You can use it to, you know, remove muddiness, add sparkle and presence.
Okay.
Like, for example, you could use EQ to remove like the low rumbling frequencies.
So that it doesn't clash with the kick drum.
Oh, so that's how you get that like really tight, punchy sound.
Exactly.
Okay. What about compression? I feel like I hear that word all the time, but I don't
Yeah.
really understand it.
Compression is, it's about controlling the dynamic range of the sound.
So making the loud parts quieter and the quiet parts louder.
It's more about like controlling the peaks and valleys
Okay.
and making it more like consistent and polished.
Okay.
So for example, you might use compression on like a vocal performance to make it sit nicely in the mix, or to add punch and power to a drum track.
So like give it that kind of like professional
Exactly.
playing.
Okay. And then there's saturation,
Okay.
which is all about like adding warmth and character.
Warmth. Okay.
Yeah, think of it like cooking, right?
Right.
You can add spices
Okay.
to enhance the flavor.
Yeah.
Saturation's kind of like that for audio.
Okay. So what would you use saturation on?
You know, you might use it on a vocal. Okay.
To add some grit and presence. Or on like a drum loop to make it sound thicker and more powerful.
Okay. I forget about like reverb and delay.
Reverb and delay.
Those are like the space creators.
Exactly.
So how do those work?
So reverb is basically, it simulates the sound of a room,
Okay.
while delay creates like echoes and repetitions.
So reverb is like if you're in a cathedral, and delay is like
Yeah.
if you're like yelling in a canyon.
Yeah.
That's sound.
So reverb is often used to give sounds like a sense of space and airiness,
Okay.
while delay can create a sense of like rhythm and movement.
Gotcha.
You can use them subtly or dramatically depending on the effect you're going for.
And then automation. What is that all about?
Automation.
Oh,
It's like the unsung hero of a lot of great mixes.
why is it unsung?
It's like it's often working behind the scenes.
Oh, and you might not even like consciously notice it,
Yeah.
but it adds subtle changes and movements to the track.
Okay.
And without it, the track would just feel very static.
So what is it doing?
It's basically like controlling parameters over time.
Right.
So instead of like just setting a static value for, say, the volume of a track,
Mm-hmm.
you can use automation to like make it gradually fade in, or like swell up during a chorus, or dip down during a verse.
It's all about like movement.
Yeah, exactly. And you can automate almost anything.
Wow.
Like you can automate the panning of a sound to make it move from left to right, or automate like the cutoff frequency of a filter to create like a sweeping effect.
Wow. It really is like giving your music a life of its own.
It is.
That's amazing. Okay, so we've covered like EQ, compression, saturation, reverb, delay, automation.
Right.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to take in, but the key is like you don't have to learn it all at once.
Yeah.
You know, pick one concept, really dive deep into it.
Yeah, baby steps.
Exactly. And then move on to the next one. You're not going to like become a master mixer overnight.
Of course not.
It takes time, practice, and just a willingness to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you know, not be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot to learn, but it sounds like the main thing is to just keep practicing, right?
Yeah, definitely. The more you use these tools, the more like second nature they become.
Yeah,
Oh.
totally. And speaking of that journey, the video talks about like, you know, the long road from amateur to pro.
Right.
I'm curious, like what are some of the biggest hurdles that you've seen like new producers face?
I think one of the biggest ones is just like that fear of not being good enough.
Oh, yeah.
Like a lot of people get stuck in this cycle of self-doubt.
Yeah.
Thinking they need to know everything before they can even start.
Right.
But, you know, everyone starts somewhere.
Yeah.
The only way to get better is to just like embrace the process.
Yeah, just start creating. Like, you're not going to be a virtuoso overnight.
Exactly. And I think another big hurdle is just like the sheer amount of information out there.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's like with the internet, you know, there's endless tutorials, articles, forum discussions.
It can be so overwhelming.
It's overwhelming, and it's easy to get caught up in like tutorial hell.
Yeah.
Where you're just constantly consuming information.
Yeah, you're not actually making music.
And not actually making any music.
Yeah. So what's the balance? Like, how do you find that balance?
It's important to like find a balance between learning and doing.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to like experiment, try things out, and just see what works.
Yeah, find your own path. So what advice would you give to someone who's feeling like lost or discouraged, you know?
I would say, like, first and foremost, remember why you started making music in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, what was it about music that drew you in? And like reconnect with that passion.
Stay focused on the joy of it.
Yes, exactly. Another thing I would say is like find a community.
Oh yeah, community is huge.
Connect with other music producers, share your work, ask for feedback.
Yeah.
You know, learn from each other.
Because it's easy to feel isolated when you're, you know, just in your bedroom studio all the time.
It is.
Yeah, it's nice to have people to bounce ideas off of.
Absolutely. And also, don't underestimate the power of just like listening to music.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the music you love.
Okay.
Analyze it.
Like we were talking about before.
Yeah, full circle.
Love it.
Try to figure out how it was made.
So it all comes back to just like immersing yourself in music.
It does.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a great deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much. What about you?
Me too, yeah.
Yeah, so as we wrap up, like, what's the one thing that you hope people will, like, take away from this conversation?
Don't let music production intimidate you. It's a journey. It's not a race.
Yeah.
Focus on, like, building a solid foundation, experimenting, and most importantly, having fun.
Love it. I think that's the perfect note to end on. So to all of you out there, keep creating, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.